Hello and welcome to my PowerPoint on physical neglect. My name is Lauren Lieb. Thank you for joining me on this. Neglect are common. At least 1 in 7 children experience abuse or neglect in the past year, according to the CDC. When dealing with children who might be abused or neglected, some things to keep in mind besides the things that we can automatically see are things like unexplained injuries like bruises, extreme behaviors like excessive crying, running away and truancy, poor hygiene and not weather appropriate clothing, or the fear of going home. We should also look at if the child has a poor relationship to peers, behavior changes from the previous year, constant tiredness or lack of energy, along with being hungry, and also a child who might be doing this for attention-seeking behaviors. Children who might have been neglected or abused might have been before this point happy children, children who might have gotten well along with peers. Typically, abused children may often appear scared, anxious, depressed, withdrawn, or more aggressive than they normally would. Another one is that a child who might do this at a young age, or they might take risk-taking behaviors. This could be for any number of reasons. Many children may start to carry weapons to protect themselves, and this can cause a number of issues at school as long as within the home. Overlooked symptoms, like we talked before, one of the most overlooked symptoms is behavior changes. This is due to beforehand, like I mentioned, children before abuse may have been very happy, outgoing children, but when the abuse started happening, then they became withdrawn, closed off, angry. And some of the times this is just seen as a kid being aggressive or disobedient, but we have to look deeper and actually see what the problem is. However, if this has been happening since the start of school, it might be hard to figure out when the behavior had changed. Like if a child was in preschool and then they started around kindergarten or first grade having behavior problems, and now they're like in sixth grade, no one's really going to go back that far to see where the behavior had changed. But it is our duty as counselors to find out where the behavior had changed and start from there and start to look how to make things right. Prevalence in Alabama. Physical abuse was most prevalent maltreatment type in 2018. Most of these calls were made by adults in reference to children who were under 12. According to the Alabama Department of Public Health in 2018, physical abuse was the most prevalent at 53.3%. Then neglect was next at 42.9%, and sexual abuse was the least at 16.6%. Within these calls, over 16% were related to children who were under the age of 1. When screening or assessing a child for any type of abuse, body language is key. When questioning a child, it is best to have a general conversation where the child will disclose things spontaneously. And note the child's voice changes, eye contact, breathing patterns, and change of subject when describing situations or people. The way the child answers the question can be telling on what's going on in the home. Children might not be forthcoming, though, with information, so the body language and if they manage to talk about certain topics would be the best way to find out about what's going on at home. However, we have to do this ethically. So this is why we can ask them verbally. Basically, the way to do this is making broad questions and not letting the child to say anything that they may not want to. So we cannot ask leading questions. These are some choice questions to ask kids. However, there are more, but you should pick out questions that will give you enough information to do this in one run. This would make it where the child would not have to sit through multiple interviews. You as a counselor should really only be asking broad questions because we are not trained enough to handle the more in-depth questions and how to respond to them. Some choice questions. Have the child describe what a typical day at home is like, what they eat, where they play, who's in the house, when these people leave, and another one is to ask about the utilities. Ask if the water's on. Ask if the electric's on. Another one is, do you hurt anywhere on your body? The next one, what happens when you do something your parents don't like? Listen to their reaction and their answer. Another one is, has anyone touched you in a way you don't like? These are all broad enough questions where they can answer in almost any way, but it's also not leading the child on to answer in a way that would harm someone they love. One of the other things that we should be talking about is how to report abuse. There are many people who are required by law to report suspected abuse or negligence. However, this does not mean that they are the only people qualified to make this report. Anybody can make this report, and all that is required is that you feel like there is reasonable suspicion for neglect. When reporting abuse, it should be done to a police officer or to the Department of Human Resources. After this, it is left to the organizations to go into action. If you are with someone who comes into regular contact with a child, physician, a teacher, social worker, nurse, or daycare worker, for example, you should be aware of your legal obligation to report incidents of suspected or obvious child abuse or neglect. That is from the Child Abuse Neglect Reporting, Alabama Department of Human Resources. So you have to report if you are one of these people, but they are not the only ones. Anybody can report as long as they have their heart in the right place. One my school district that I work with would say how to report the abuse. I will have to inform my principal of the possibility of this child being removed if the report is found to be substantial. I would then ask that the teacher's homework teacher if she had noticed anything that might have changed about the student recently or over the past few weeks, or anything else that could be used to help the police if more evidence is needed. I would have to make a report to my DHR, and then I would talk to my principal at the school and let him know that the report has been made about this child. My agency and how I report the abuse. I work for a therapeutic foster care company called Alabama Mentor through Savita. We have constant check-ins with children and are constantly checking for abuse and neglect and other things like that. One of the ways we do this is through a child personal safety interview. These are open-ended questions that the child can answer. Like one of them on there is, are there consequences when you have bad behavior? If the answer is yes, the child needs to describe what the consequences are. However, due to the nature of my job, we cannot just automatically go to the police if the child has said something of abuse. This is because we've had children in the past who have lied and said, hey, this is going on. We have to get more people involved. So what I have to do is I have to raise concerns with my boss, and then my boss has to go over to the foster parent's house and talk to the child again. And then if the stories line up, that's when we take immediate action and go to the police and get other parties involved. Until then, though, we constantly just keep on doing these checks and constantly going over there, check on the child, and make sure that there is no signs of physical abuse anywhere. How to address vicarious trauma. Vicarious trauma is something that I have been through a lot since starting this job. The nature of my job has some of my kids opening up to me about things that they have been through. Along with that, I've been able to know every part of their case, so I have to read and study and constantly be updated on new developments. I have to read in so much detail about what's going on. It's painful, and reading is so difficult and also so different from them telling you what has happened to them. So I had to learn how to emotionally be there for my clients, but also protect myself. Some of the ways I do this is leave work at work. Whatever needs to be done can be done the next day. I set boundaries for how long I work. This is stating that you're going to work from this hour to this hour. Anything that happens after that, unless it's a crisis, it can wait till the next day. Mental health days where I sit at home and give time for me and my husband, because he is my emotional support. And that's something I have to do to recharge my emotional gauge to help my kids. I go to therapy myself where I talk about struggles, both personal and the ones I have at work. I play video games to unwind and relax. And while these might work for me, they may not for the next person, so it's important that they find their own way of addressing their vicarious trauma. And thank you for letting me educate about physical neglect and some of the things that I've done with through my agency. Have a good evening.